the decades after the Cold War, the U.S. Navy absorbed sustained budget cuts resulting in large force reductions. The total size of the fleet dwindled from nearly 600 active ships in 1987 to around 285 today. During this period, naval planners focused their substantial, yet shrinking, budgetary resources on large, costly, high-end platforms such as aircraft carriers, at the expense of smaller surface warfare combatants such as frigates. This approach perhaps suited the range of global expeditionary missions that the Navy was called upon to support in the 1990s. A time when the United States faced no proximate military competitors. However, its lack of platforms currently leaves the sea service in a parlous state as it faces intensifying major power competition from China and Russia. At a recent Center for the National Interest event, two leading authorities on naval strategy, operations and force structure, explained how the Navy can take steps to create a more balanced force that will adequately prepare the fleet for a new era of great power naval competition. According to Milan Vigo, professor of operations at the U.S. Naval War College, lack of understanding of naval theory makes it difficult for the Navy to develop sound doctrine. And as a result, to determine force requirements. For example, Vigo notes that the Navy has an ingrained offensive mindset, which contributes to neglect of the defensive elements of naval combat such as mine warfare and protecting maritime trade. At the strategic level, this conditions a preoccupation with sea control, as opposed to sea denial. However, for Vigo, it is not inconceivable, especially as capable competitors emerge, that the U.S. Navy might be put on the defensive in force to shift its focus from sea control to sea denial. For example, if Russia and China combined in the Western Pacific, the U.S. Navy would probably be on the defensive, a position it has not occupied since the early days, 1941 to 1942, of the Pacific War against Japan. The challenge is that the Navy faces different, conceivable scenarios that could require it to implement sea control or sea denial strategies. This makes planning difficult, because, for Vigo, in thinking about what kind of ships you have, what number of ships you have is all based on whether you are going to conduct sea control or sea denial, what focus will be on protection of shipping versus attack on shipping. Furthermore, the efficacy of naval strategic planning is hampered by a lack of joint approach to warfare at sea, citing a need for working with the other services to help the Navy carry out its missions. A repeated issue raised by both panelists is the imbalance in naval force structure between large, highly capable surface combatants, and smaller, cheaper platforms. This is the result of a series of budgetary and planning choices made in the 2 decades following the Cold War's end. During this period, the Navy was satisfied to ride its Cold War inventory of ships and weapons down, always believing that it could turn the spigot back on in a crisis. It also believed that if it had limited dollars, it should strategically spend them on high-capability ships, rather than maintaining the previous Cold War balance of small numbers of high-capability ships and a larger capacity of less capable ships, observed Jerry Hendricks, a retired U.S. Navy captain. With regards to surface warfare combatants, This approach fostered an emphasis on cruisers and destroyers, while frigates were eliminated entirely from the fleet. The drastic reduction in ship numbers is only part of the Navy's current problem. According to Hendricks, the Navy employs many of the same missiles that it has used for over 3 decades. Furthermore, Hendricks lamented that the retirement of longer-range carrier-wing aircraft such as the F-14 Tomcat and S-3 Viking has since 1988 slashed the average unrefueled range of the air wing from 900 miles to just under 500 nautical miles. The static range of the Navy's stand-off munitions and reduced carrier wing range is particularly detrimental in the current strategic context. China and Russia have invested in a new generation of anti-access, air denial weapons, that have sought to push the US and its allies farther from their shores, establishing sea control from land, and redefining territorial sovereignty over the seas. This, combined with the limited ability of US munitions and aircraft to strike targets in potential adversaries' homelands, means that in the event of a naval conflict with China or Russia, the United States will face tremendous difficulty projecting conventional firepower ashore into the enemy's homeland. As a result, the Navy could be forced to fight a bloody battle at sea in order to get within range of its enemies. China and Russia have been so successful at creating anti-access, area denial bubbles that it has forced the US Navy to alter how it thinks about the nature of sea warfare. Naval strategic thought has shifted from focusing on power projection and sea control to an ephemeral concept called distributed lethality, which roughly equates to a long campaign of attrition at sea, rather than short power projection campaigns that had characterized modern strategic planning.